One specific frequency to affect the way we behave. It's true. A specific frequency.
So a typical morning in the kingdom, the first coming to America. Akeem, he was in the kingdom of heaven. So that's how we're gonna be able to communicate with the animals. And you other nations, number one on the list is gonna be you Edomites, you're gonna be out in the field, getting your ass whipped, working your ass off. So we're gonna get up in the morning singing. Hey, you're gonna get up, you lay with one of your wives or concubines or whatever. So when we get up in the morning, we're gonna have a smile on our face. That's what Psalm 149 is talking about. When we get up in the morning, we're gonna be singing and dancing. We're gonna go to sleep happy, we're gonna get up happy, we're gonna eat happy. Every time we eat some food, it's gonna be good.
Therefore the redeemed of the Lord shall return, and come with singing unto Zion, and everlasting joy shall be upon their head. They shall obtain gladness and joy, and sorrow and mourning shall flee away.
So a typical morning in the kingdom, the first coming to America. Akeem, he was in the kingdom of heaven. So that's how we're gonna be able to communicate with the animals. And you other nations, number one on the list is gonna be you Edomites, you're gonna be out in the field, getting your ass whipped, working your ass off.
Faster! Faster! Shut up!
All right, Shalom. First and foremost, I'd like to give all praise, honor, and glory unto Yahweh, Bahashem, Yahweh Shah, Bahashem, Makapandash. Double honors unto the apostles and the elders of GMS who rule well, teach well, being great examples towards younger brothers. And peace and blessings, salutation to the whole flick out there pushing his word in truth and in sincerity across the four winds. In the name of Yahweh Bahashem, Yahweh Shah. Pushing get up out of here. Shalom to the whole elect, the believers, the listeners who have came back to the obedience of the scriptures through faith in Yahweh Bashem Al Shai. All right. And what I want to get into, all right, this morning, is continue on in the book of First Kings. All right, we made to chapter 11. And this is when, we're going to see the downfall of King Solomon. Okay, as he, will become enticed, by, his heathen wives. Okay, to begin to go into other gods. Okay, and this is also an example of what we've seen in the garden, going back to Adam, as he was, enticed, by Eve, to go after the way of the serpent, which the serpent was into what? Witchcraft, divinations. Okay, so Eve, brought into it, and she brought it to Adam, and then what do you have? The fall. Okay, so King Solomon, and he's in his rulership, okay, and he reached a certain point to where he becomes weak, okay, to the flesh, and he begins to go after, okay, the gods okay, of these heathen women. Okay, so now it's another fall, you know. So Adam and King Solomon have similar stories. All right, just King Solomon is more detailed. Okay, but it's pretty much the same thing happening again. Okay, so let's go here. Because just as the Lord, visited Adam and gave him the breath, well, he visited King Solomon, okay, and gave him what wisdom and understanding, an understanding heart. Same thing that was given to Adam, okay, and he reigned, for a time in righteousness, all right, but failed at the end, okay. So let's go here. When you go to the book of First Kings, chapter 11, all right, we'll read into it. This is the book of First Kings, chapter 11, and verse 1. Now King Solomon loved many foreign women, besides Pharaoh's daughter. He married women from Moab, Ammon, Edom, Sidon, and from among the Hittites. The Lord clearly instructed the people of Israel, you must not marry them because they will turn your hearts to their gods. Yet Solomon insisted on loving them anyway. Okay, and the heathen woman, the heathen women was not supposed to be, wise. All right, likened unto the Israelite wives. All right, they were supposed to be all concubines. Okay, women, what they call lesser wives. Okay, it wasn't supposed to be agreement between the families when it became to the heathen women. Okay, there was a difference. A concubine was a wife, but she was a lesser wife. She didn't have any inheritance rights. Okay, she didn't. There wasn't, a deal between, an Israelite family and the heathen family. Okay, those things are not to be. And King Solomon, he began to marry, these women. Now they was all women of kings, daughters of kings. Okay, and he began to make, these pacts, with these heathens, and eventually, was seduced into the gods of the heathen. Okay, so when you read this here, it says he had 700 wives of royal birth and 300 concubines, and in fact, they did turn his heart away from the Lord Yahweh Bashem Al Shah. So, he got weak for him. Okay, because even when you go here, all right, it says he had, even wives amongst the Hittites. When you go here and Deuteronomy, the 7th chapter, okay, this is Deuteronomy 7 and 1. It says, when the Lord your power brings you into the land you are about to enter and occupy, he will clear away many nations ahead of you: the Hittites, the Girgashites, the Amorites, the Canaanites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, the Jebusites. These 7 nations are greater and more numerous, okay, and more numerous than you. When the Lord your power hands these nations over to you and you conquer them, you must completely destroy them, make no treaties with them, and show them no mercy. All right, because a marriage agreement, is like a treaty with a family. Two families, two Israelite families. When there's a marriage between a man and a woman, that's a treaty between two families. An agreement, an alliance. Okay, and it says you must not intermarry with them. Do not let your daughters and sons marry their sons and daughters, for they will lead your children away from me to worship other gods. Then the anger of the Lord will be burnt against you, and he will quickly destroy you. Okay, so we was given, strict commandment, not to intermarry. Okay, amongst, okay, these particular heathens, mainly these Canaanites. Okay, these Hittites. All right, which King Solomon had wives of the Hittites. Okay, and the other heathen women. Okay, which there was just supposed to be concubines and lesser wives. Okay, King Solomon, he had, he's making a lot of political moves, alliances and trade deals. Okay, but there was a particular order to do that in, and he strayed away from that order, and it led to exactly what the Lord said will happen. Verse 4 said, for they will lead your children away from me to worship other gods. Then the anger of the Lord will be will burn against you, and he will quickly destroy you. This is what you must do. You must break down their pagan altars and shatter their sacred pillars, cut down their Asherah poles, and burn their idols. Okay, you see. So this was the instructions given to us before we came into the land. All right, was not to intermarry and to burn down those idols. All right, that those Canaanites had established in the land. Okay, but as we go back here to First Kings, all right, chapter 11. Okay, First Kings 11:3. It says he had 10 wives of royal birth and 300 concubines, and in fact, they did turn his heart away from the Lord. In Solomon's old age, they turned his heart to worship other gods instead of being completely faithful to the Lord, his power, as his father David, all right, had been. Okay, so he fell away. Okay, it says Solomon worshiped Ashtaroth, the goddess of the Sidonians, and Molech, all right, the detestable god of the Ammonites. In this way, Solomon did what was evil in the Lord's sight. He refused to follow the Lord completely, as his father David had done. On the Mount of Olives, east of Jerusalem, he had built a pagan shrine for Chemosh, the detestable god of Moab, and another for Molech, the detestable god, all right, of the Ammonites. Solomon built such shrines for all his foreign wives to use for burning incense and sacrificing to their gods. The Lord was angry, all right, with Solomon, for his heart had turned away from the Lord, the power of Israel, who had appeared to him twice. Okay, so the Lord was furious, with the sins, okay, of Solomon. Okay, as he began to what indulge, okay, into other gods. Okay, and King David sinned, but he never indulged into other gods. He stayed faithful to Yahweh Bashim Shai, even in, when he went off, he repented. He never veered off to other guys. He stayed faithful. Okay. But now you go here, okay, just to show you, what's that real quick in the book of the scripture tell you what wine and women will make men of understanding fall. Okay. Let's see if we can find it. Oh. Let's go here. I got this in the NLT. Okay. GNT, Salaki. So let's get this in the GNT. When you go to the book of First Esdras, it just shows you, the power of women. And see, this is why when Yahweh Shai, when he came, he didn't even deal with women. He didn't want to compromise the mission at all. So he didn't even deal with women. Because he knew that was his downfall as Adam, okay, and as King Solomon, okay. So this time he didn't even want to deal with women. You see. So going back into it says, this is what we get. This is First Esdras chapter 4. All right, in verse. All right, I started 14. Now, this is when they put out a challenge. The king put out a challenge. About who can give the wisest saying about what's the most powerful thing. The first man went into wine, second man went into the king, and now we get to the third man, and he's going into the woman, being the stronger. He's going to make his case about the woman, being the strongest, which a woman is a powerful thing. Okay. And a weak-minded man, all right, a woman to have a field day. Okay. If a man is weak, even for moments, the woman can be very destructive, okay, to a mind that's easily manipulated. Okay, so when you read this in First Ezra 4:14, said, "Gentlemen, he began. The emperor is certainly powerful. Men are numerous and wine is strong. But who rules and controls them all? It is women. Women gave birth to the emperor and all the men who rule over the land and sea. Women brought them into the world. Women brought up the men who planted the vineyards from which wine comes. Women make the clothes that men wear. Women bring honor to men. In fact, without women, men, okay, couldn't live. Many men accumulate silver or gold or other beautiful things, but if they see a woman with a pretty face or a good figure, they will leave it all to gape and stare, and they will desire her more than their wealth. And this is a lot of this, Queen of Heaven, you know, um, mindset, doctrine that runs this earth. That's why, this is a heavy, this is why this is a society, okay, that's woman dominated, okay, when it comes to ideology. The women, are put on the pedestal, okay. So this is, going back to the Queen of Heaven. Without women, couldn't nothing be. As if the women, was all powerful, like the woman is the Most High, okay. And that's the spirit, especially here in America. Okay, it says, a man will leave his own father who brought him up and leave his own country to get married. He will forget his father, his mother, and his country to spend the rest of his life with his wife. So you must recognize that women are your masters. Don't you work and sweat and then take all that you have earned and give it to your wives. A man will take his sword and go out to attack, rob, steal, and sail the seas, okay, and rivers. He may face, all right, he may have to face lions or travel in the dark, but when he has robbed, stolen, and plundered, he will bring the loot home to the woman he loves. A man loves his wife more than his parents. Some men are driven out of their minds on the account of women, and others become slaves for the sakes of a woman. Okay? And this just shows you that these things do happen, and that a woman, all right, can be very manipulative and manipulate you into being her servant. You look up and now you her servant. You see, and then King Solomon, and he found that out in his older age. Okay, as you're gonna get the book of Ecclesiastes, man. All right, but a woman, all right, will ruin your empire. A woman will ruin your goddamn dynasty, man. Okay, so King Solomon, all right, was an example, okay, of a wise king, okay, becoming weak, to lust. All right, that's why Yahweh Shai, not only was he perfect, in the law, okay, but he overcame lust, and it's not on us to be perfect in the law, but we are to overcome our lust in this grace period, man, to where we're not ruined, okay, whether it's the woman, whether it's wine, whether it's, money, whatever it is, okay, but we're here to overcome, the flesh to where the flesh doesn't ruin us, okay. The flesh ruined Adam, it ruined, King Solomon, okay, which led to the ruin of the nation, the fall of the sons of God. Okay, it says others have been put to death, have ruined their lives, or have committed crimes because of the woman. Okay, and how many men now are in prison, dead? Okay, based off the woman. Okay, so the moral of the story is beware. You see, it says because when you go from there, let's get this real quick in the book. Because a woman will take you down through there, man. You see, and this society has painted, the women as these innocent creatures, and they can do no wrong, and always the victim. And, when it's the complete opposite, man. The woman, all right, can be a monster out here, the majority. Okay, so So let's go from there. Let's get this in the book of, because we read, let's get this real quick. Because we read this the other day, concerning this is Sirach 47, all right, and 12. I started 13. I started 12. It said, after him rose up a wise son. This is after King David. For his sake he dwelt at large. Solomon reigned in a peaceable time and was honored. For the Most High made all quiet round about him, that he might build an house in his name and prepare his sanctuary forever. How wise was thou in thy youth, and as a flood filled with understanding. Thy soul covered the whole earth, and thou fillest it with dark parables. Thy name went far unto the islands, and for thy peace thou wast beloved. The countries marvel at thee for thy songs and proverbs and parables and interpretations. By the name of the Lord, which is called the Lord power of Israel, thou didst gather gold as tin, and didst multiply silver as lead. Thou didst bow thy loins unto women, okay? And by thy body thou was brought into subjection, okay? So Solomon became, a slave to sin in his later days. He became submissive, okay, to wickedness, and said, thou didst stain thy honor and pollute thy seed, so that thou broughtest wrath upon thy children and was grieved for thy folly. Okay, so what he did, not only had the Lord displeased with him, okay, but this standard of wickedness, was always, it plagued our people. It plagued Israel to the point that the Lord had to divide the kingdoms, and we had to go into captivity eventually. Okay, it says, so the kingdom was divided, and out of Ephraim ruled a rebellious kingdom. All right, which we're getting into that point. Okay, you see, but this wasn't the end. He will always, show mercy. Okay, through the house of David. Eventually, that ultimate mercy came through Yahushua being born and Yahushua getting it right. That's why Yahushua was so tapped in, when he came, because he knew he had to clean up, he had to clean up his mess, from past lives and, all the mess of Israel that transpired from it. Okay. That's why Yahushua came, he was so tapped in. Okay. I say he didn't deal with women, family, none of that. He was just tapped into the mission. Okay. So, let's go here to the book of Ecclesiastes. All right, this is Ecclesiastes, because it says it 2 times. Because you go to the book of Ecclesiastes, it's pretty much like a diary, format, dealing with King Solomon. You can tell he was older. He had a lot more experience, in the book of Ecclesiastes. Okay, now you go here, Ecclesiastes 1:17. It says, and I gave my heart to know wisdom and to know madness and folly. I perceive that this also was vexation of spirit. Okay, so King Solomon gave himself over to know madness and folly. He went into the dark side. Okay, and he came out stained. You see, and he mentioned it again in the same book, chapter 7. Which we all, we was born into the dark side, and we had to be brought to the light. King Solomon was, was raised in the light and went to the dark side. Okay. Well, see, as Yahushua, he had no more curiosity and wickedness. He had did everything. And he knew that the conclusion, okay, was righteousness. You know, this is Ecclesiastes 7:25. It says, I apply my heart to know and to search and to seek out wisdom and the reason of things and to know the wickedness of folly, even the foolishness of madness. Okay. So on this account, he's going to go into more detail. Okay. It says, and I found more bitter than death the woman whose heart is snares and nets. Okay. The woman's mind is, a lot of women, all right, their mind is operating on how to trap you up, how to put you in the snare, how to manipulate some type of control over you. Okay, that's how a woman mind is always thinking. She's all just looking, examining how you move, trying to figure you out to put you in some type of snare, put you in some type of, you know, mind game, some type of manipulation. Okay, and a lot of women, their mind just think like that constantly. Okay, and it says whose heart is snares and nets, and her hands are bands. Okay, which will have you in what? In bondage, man. The woman, especially in this society, man, the women, they just love to have the men in bondage. They want to be able to control your mood. They want you to be happy when they want you to be happy. They want to be able to make you sad when they want you to be sad. Okay, they want your joy to come from them. That's why you see random women are just you see random women, and they look at Jake that's in a good mood and they just be frowned up, you know, like ain't nobody got this nigga in control, you know. But that's the way that a lot of women think. It said, "Who pleases the Most High shall escape from her, but the sinner shall be taken by her." So pleasing the Most High, that's why we keep this the focus. The Lord won't allow us to be ensnared into these things. We got to be mindful out here, man. All right, be extremely mindful, man, because there's a lot, okay, of women, okay, that ain't right. Even those that know that they're Israelites, man, and they come and play these games and they play these roles and they don't be right, okay. But if you're a man that's pleasing to the Most High, He always gives you a skate route, okay, and you take that skate route, all right, and it is what it is. Okay, and you can try to force it, all right, and it's gonna get bad. Speaking from experience, you try to force a thing and it'll get bad. Okay, it says, but the sinner shall be taken by her. Behold, this I have found, said the preacher, counting one by one to find out the account. It says, which yet my soul seeketh, but I found not. One man among 1,000 have I found, but a woman among all those I have found not. So he said, one out of every 1,000 men, okay, he found to be virtuous, but out of 1,000 women, he found none. And that doesn't mean that no woman is virtuous. It just means out of 1,000 there was none. So it would probably took 10,000, 100,000. Don't know. Okay, but it's a rare. It's a rare thing. Okay, it says yeah, that's the point in it. Okay, so this is why the apostles, they've been warning way before the red pill, way before the podcast era. The apostles been warning, beware. Okay, but like I said, this society caters to the woman's uh, desire, to rule over men. Okay, to be men's master. Well, this society plays into that. There's things that reinforce her to be a master. Especially you get the woman pregnant. Okay, you're done. She's your master. You see, that's why you get the wrong woman pregnant, and you Jake be miserable, man. Okay, so let's go here. Let's go back to First Kings. So this back in First King chapter 1. Hold on, I think the brother has some. Yep. This is the brother Damawati, GMS in his likeness. Proverbs 31 and 3. It says, Give not thy strength unto women, nor thy ways to that which destroy kings. Okay. So, you give your strength, your ability, unto the woman. Okay. It say destroy that which destroy kings, man. Kings have, been destroyed. Okay. Women, empires have fallen, dynasties have ended off of women. Okay. So the thing is, give not thy strength, which is thy mind. Okay. Your mind shouldn't be wrapped around no goddamn woman, man. Okay. She shouldn't be your everything. That BS of the West. Okay. The woman being your everything, happy life. Happy wife, happy life. No, that's backwards. Okay. And if you move and operate like that, you're setting yourself up for failure. To where your emotions are linked to her emotions, so now you're on this emotional roller coaster, whether you're distracted, okay, you're all over the place, caught up in a bunch of nothing, okay? Nah, man, that's not how we ought to be, okay? Let's go here. The brother got Isaiah 3 and 12 says, For my people, children are their oppressors, and women rule over them. O my people, they which lead thee cause thee to err and destroy the way of thy paths. Okay, and you look at what people got today. They say they got black fatigue. Well, what does black fatigue come from? Okay, what does the black fatigue come from? The matriarch. Okay, the culture. All right, that the society is complaining about nigger culture. Well, that's a product of the matriarch, the serpent in the matriarch. Okay, they just have led people to err. Just a culture of error. You see, no structure, okay, no vision. There's a bunch of randomness, wickedness, violent, toxic, okay, and that's what the leadership of women, all right, has gotten our people. Okay, now let's go back. First Kings 11, it says, "So now the Most High is going to address, just like he addressed, Adam, all right." This First Kings 11 and 10, it says he had warned Solomon specifically about worshiping other gods, but Solomon did not listen to the Lord's command. So now the Lord said to him, Since you have kept my covenant and have disobeyed my decrees, I will surely tear the kingdom away from you and give it to one of your servants. But for the sake of your father David, I will not do it while you are still alive. I will take away the kingdom from your son. And even so, I will not take away the entire kingdom. I will let him be king of one tribe for the sake of my David and for the sake of Jerusalem, my chosen city. Okay, because it was through the line of Judah, or the ultimate mercy was going to come, that was going to be through Yahushua. Okay, so he, the southern kingdom, Judah, eventually will be Benjamin and Levi. All right, those three tribes, but through the southern kingdom, okay, the mercy will come through Yahushua during the time of the Romans. Okay, it said, Then the Lord raised up Hadad, the Edomite, a member of Edom's royal family, to be Solomon's adversary. Okay, so now you're seeing Edom, raise up the first heathen to revolt. Okay, from under King Solomon was who? Edom. All right, it says years before David had defeated Edom, Joab, his army commander, had stayed to bury some of the Israelite soldiers who had died in battle. While there, they killed every male in Edom. Joab and the army of Israel had stayed there for 6 months, killing them, but Hadad and a few of his father's royal officials escaped and headed for Egypt. Hadad was just a boy at the time, so Joab, they were trying to eradicate the lineage of Edom. It was killing all the males, but it wasn't that time, for Edom to be blotted out the earth. He still had, prophecy to fulfill, as we're living in the rulership of Edom today. Esau had to be, the end of the world. Okay. And Jacob would be what? The beginning of it that followed. So Esau had to be around. That's why even you go back to, let's get Hebrews real quick, 11. It was all for prophecy's sake. Okay, Hebrews 11 and 20. And it says, by faith, Isaac blessed Jacob and Esau concerning things to come, which Esau was blessed with the sword and the fatness of the earth, which he has today. All right. And he dominates the earth through the sword. Okay. But Jacob will have the kingdom. It will be an everlasting kingdom to come after Esau. Okay. And the kingdom will be translated to Jacob. The everlasting kingdom will be through Yahushua for Israel. Okay. So Esau, he was given that sword, to preserve himself for this time, to dominate the earth in wickedness, okay, and be judged, okay, in this time. All right. So you go back to 1 Kings 11. So now the Lord is causing, adversaries to rise up, against King Solomon, So he ruled in peace, okay, but during close to the time of his death, the Lord started to undo their peace because of the sin, of the other gods. And it says verse 18, it says 1 Kings 11:18. It says they set out from Midian and went to Paran, where others joined them. Then they traveled to Egypt and went to Pharaoh, who gave them a home, food, and some land. Pharaoh grew very fond of Hadad, and he gave him his wife's sister in marriage, the sister of Queen Taphanes. She bore him a son named Genubath. Taphanes raised him in Pharaoh's palace among Pharaoh's own sons. So Esau, he was amongst, like the courts of Pharaoh. That's why the devil, had this infatuation, with Egypt, he was already, dealing with them Hamite wives going back to Esau. He had them Canaanite wives. Okay, so he was always linked to Ham, but then this time he was linked, to Egypt. Even when you go into this devil Aleister Crowley, okay, a lot of this sexual magic, even what we see in Hollywood and the music industry, go back to Egyptian practices, man. Okay, let me see if I can look it up out. I should have looked it up before I started. In Egypt, so the devil, he has a let's see. All right, so let's go here real quick. Just a quick overview. Okay, dealing with the devil. All right, Aleister Crowley. All right. It says Aleister Crowley, all right, visited Egypt 3 times between 1902 and 1904. The most significant trip being in 1904 when he and his wife Rose honeymooned there. During this visit, Crowley claimed to have received a divine communication from a supernatural entity named Awas, which dictated the text of the Book of the Law. This text became the foundation of his new religion, Thelema. Let's see. Crowley, all right. Let's see. Yep. It says Crowley believed Rose, all right, his wife, experienced clairaudient communications from ancient Egyptian deities, including Horus, channeling through Awas. Crowley performed rituals, including one in the Great Pyramid of Giza, which is believed, all right, which he believed opened him to Awas communication. For 3 consecutive days, Crowley transcribed messages from Awas, which became known as the Book, okay, of the Law, okay. And it says the couple also visited the. So ultimately, this devil went over there and was tapped in, okay. He went over there and tapped in. You see, and this guy here, this is where you get, okay, the do as thou wilt, okay, saying, that was the law, do as thou wilt. You see, that comes from this guy, Aleister Crowley, okay, which a lot of celebrities, you'll see, okay, they'll have, their shirt. Let me see if it'll show some of these celebrities, because Esau, the music industry, they tapped in, to the Egyptian magic. Let me see if it'll show. But you'll see this devil. Hold on, pull it up. So you'll go and just looking at these different celebrities. All right, you see Obama, with the Aleister Crowley shirt. Okay, you see the Jay-Z, the do as thou wilt. Okay, but this is devil. Tap back into the ancient, witchcraft. All right, with these shirts you'll see. Okay, a lot of celebrities. Okay, I think they even have the Beatles. Okay, because the music industry, okay, is nothing but a Babylonian church, Egyptian, But these shirts are heavy, amongst different I can say celebrities. Okay, you'll see that sign, or this picture here, the main one with this pyramid on it. You see, but yeah, man, just thought that was interesting dealing with the devil. So America, America says America is spiritual Egypt. Like, they tapped into Egypt, all right, in a major way. These devils have always been, that's why Ptolemies, they went to be Pharaoh. Alexander, the Greek, he was made a Pharaoh in Egypt. Okay, whenever they come into power, they tap in. They go tap in with Egypt. Okay, and it says, read this in verse 20 again. 1 Kings 11:20 says, she bore him a son named Genubath. Taphanes raised him in Pharaoh's palace among Pharaoh's own son. When the news reached Hadad in Egypt that David and his commander Joab were both dead, he said to Pharaoh, let me return to my own country. Okay, so when he had the word that King David and Joab, had died, he wanted to go back, to his own land, which Edom, their land was right there south, of the land that was given to Judah and Israel. That's why Judah and Edom, they bang tough. It says why Pharaoh asked him, what do you lack here that makes you want to go home? Nothing, he replied, but even so, please let me return home. The Most High also raised up Rezin, son of Eliada, as Solomon's adversary, Reason had fled from his master, King Hadad of Zobah. Okay, and these are all kings conquered by King David, and had become a leader of a gang of rebels. After David conquered Hadadezer, Rezin and his men fled to Damascus, where he became king. Rezin was Israel's bitter adversary for the rest of Solomon's reign, and he made trouble just as Hadid did. Rezin hated Israel intensely and continued to reign in the wrong. And even when we go into keep continue on the book of Kings, you're gonna see a rivalry, with Syria and Israel. Okay, and it says another rebel leader was Jeroboam, son of Nebat, one of Solomon's own official. He came from the town of Zeradah in Ephraim, and his mother was Zerah, a widow. This is the story behind his rebellion. Solomon was rebuilding the supporting terraces and repairing the walls of the city of his father, all right, David. So now you're gonna have an Israelite, all right, of the northern tribes of Ephraim, okay, that's gonna rise up in rebellion against King Solomon. It said Jeroboam was a very capable young man, and when Solomon saw how industrious he was, he put him in charge of a labor force from the tribes of Ephraim and Manasseh and the descendants of Joseph. One day, as Jeroboam was leaving Jerusalem, to the prophet Ahijah from Shiloh met him along the way. Ahijah was wearing a new cloak. The two of them were alone in a field, and Ahijah took hold of the new cloak he was wearing and tore it in 12 pieces. Then he said to Jeroboam, take these 10 pieces, for this is what the Lord, the power of Israel, says. I am about to tear the kingdom from the hand of Solomon, and I will give you 10, and I will give 10 of the tribes to you. But I will leave him one tribe for the sake of my servant David and for the sake of Jerusalem, which I have chosen out of all the tribes of Israel. For Solomon has abandoned me and worshiped Ashtaroth, the goddess of the Sidonian, Chemosh, the god of Moab, Molech, the god of the Ammonites. He has not followed my ways and done what is pleasing in my sight. He has not obeyed my decrees, all right, and regulations as David, his father, did. But I will not take the entire kingdom from Solomon at this time for the sake of my servant David, the one whom I chose and who obeyed my commands, and decrees. I will keep Solomon as a leader, all right, for the rest of his life. But I will take the kingdom away from his son and give of the tribes, all right, and give 10 of the tribes to you. His son will have one tribe, so that the descendants of David, my servant, will continue to reign, shining like a lamp in Jerusalem, the city, okay, chosen to be a place for my name. All right. And we know, I say, the southern kingdom was preserved, okay, for the coming of Yahushua, okay, which he will come through the lineage of Judah. Okay, so the southern kingdom was preserved, all the way into the time of Yahushua. That's why not long after Yahushua died and resurrected, okay, like 4 decades, like 40 years after, the southern kingdom was run out of the land too. The Lord got us out of there, and it says, and I will place you on the throne of Israel, and you will rule over all that your heart desires. If you listen to what I tell you and follow my ways and do whatever I consider to be right, and if you obey my decrees and commands as my servant David did, then I will always be with you. I will establish an enduring dynasty for you as I did for David, and I will give Israel to you. Because of Solomon's sin, I will punish the descendants of David, though not forever. Okay? Though not forever, because the Lord eventually will have mercy. So it was never a thing of the Lord will just cast, us away, or just not. Because remember, there was a covenant made, to David that he would always have a son, to sit the throne. But the Lord didn't disannul that. All right. It says Solomon It says Solomon tried to kill Jeroboam, but he fled to King Shishak of Egypt and stayed there until Solomon died. The rest of the events in Solomon's reign, including all his deeds and his wisdom, are recorded in the book of the Acts of Solomon, which we don't have that book. All right. So don't go, Amazon looking for the books of the Acts of Solomon. It's gonna be some BS. Okay. There's certain books that we're gonna get, in the kingdom. It says Solomon ruled in Jerusalem over all Israel for 40 years. When he died, he was buried in the city of David, named, all right, for his father. Then his son Rehoboam became the next king. Okay, so now, we're going into the era, after, King David and King Solomon. Okay, and it's gonna be, it's gonna get pretty chaotic, after this, you know. Um, but yeah, that was the point, just going to that, continuing on, in the book of First Kings. Okay, Lord will we just continue on rolling through the book. All right, and Lord will you brothers, okay, and you sisters continue to be edified. Once again, we give all praise and glory unto Yahweh, Bahashem, Yahweh Shai, Bahashem Kakwadash, and double honors unto the apostles and the elders of GMS who rule well, teach well, being great examples towards our brothers, and peace and blessing salutations, and hopefully, Shalom.